Hi, I'm artist TRISHA Wiles, and this is Art Explained on the piece Prayer and Unity. So this piece is Prayer and Unity, and I do love this piece. I know I say that about all of them. But when Body and Soul sold, I replaced it, the spot on the wall where Body and Soul was, I replaced with Prayer and Unity. Originally, this painting was just going to be inspired by the idea of prayer, and then as I was about halfway in, the idea of unity came through. And what I really wanted when I sat down and started painting this, I was really thinking, what does the world need right now? You know, I was watching the news, which wouldn't really matter if I was watching the news a year ago, 10 years ago, now, 5 minutes ago. You know, I think that the news paints the world as a very scary place. Whereas there is a certain perspective I take, which is, you know what, thank God the news is negative, because that means that negative experiences are the anomaly. That's out of the ordinary. You know, that's not normal. When the news is entirely positive, I think that we'll definitely have something to worry about, because that means that the positive is attention grabbing and odd and, you know, startling enough to hold our attention. Whereas right now, you know, yes, there is extreme ugliness going on in the world with a few people, but by and large, most people are good and doing good things, I believe. You know, so, but watching the news and seeing kind of this escalation and this almost like a saturated version of the violence and the vitriol and all these things that we're seeing, I said, you know, I really want to do a piece that conveys prayer. You know, how do I embody prayer on a canvas? And that's what I set out to do on this piece. I started with a very light kind of aqua color in a watercolor, and that for me was the most peaceful color that really came to mind. Now I know a lot of people think prayer is kind of hogwash and superstition, but for me, genuinely, prayer is extremely evidence-based. It's extremely logical and practical. You know, and I think that a life with the understanding that the heights of our existence is our current state, and that there is nothing out there that can assist us. I've just seen too much evidence to the contrary, to be very honest. In my own life, I've relied on prayer, and I really do believe that prayer is the most powerful thing. When I've prayed, and before I got to the point where I would pray or thought prayer was worth a damn, honestly, it was the prayers of others. You know, after I prayed, that's when things started shifting for me. And it was after things started shifting that people were telling me that they were praying for me all along the way. And so for me, it's a very, very real force. I believe what Ralph Waldo Emerson says, which is the best prayer in the world is perhaps a simple thank you. For me, I try to say thank you in the positive and what I perceive as the negative, although I know that there really is no negative. It's all, if given enough time, every experience becomes positive. Enough time and open-mindedness to receiving a different perception on it. All right, so anyway, getting a little off topic, but prayer obviously is hugely important to me, and I think that, you know, my mom once, I was in an art museum with my mom. Like I said, my mom's a retired art teacher, and she came up to me once, and this was when I would have considered myself an atheist, and I was a rather outspoken one. And she walked up behind me, and as an art teacher, she always was telling me about the value of art and how it needed to be defended in, you know, in its value. Like, people don't always assume that there's the inherent value of art in the same way that they do with math and science. And she walked up behind me at this art museum, and I think I was looking at some like religious piece, which never really resonated too much with me, like something of like the Mother Mary or like an image of prayer or something ironic. But so she walks up behind me and she says, Trisha, and I always know after Trisha, something good is going to come. It's like a little wise gem. Trisha, it's funny when you think about every civilization in the history of humanity, no matter what time or what geographical place or how far removed they were from other civilizations. Back in the day, there wasn't this type of communication where I could talk to somebody in China. It was very far removed. There were people, she said, no matter how far removed they were from one another, and no matter how far back you go in time, every society has cultivated some form of art. And don't you think that expresses this innate need for art in the human condition? And wow, like I was like, dude, I was just sitting here like looking at this painting, wondering like how this artist does like the wrinkles in the red robe or whatever, that I always find interesting. And it was so life altering, this remark that she made, because it's true. Whether you look at the Egyptians with hieroglyphics, or we would go to the African section where there would be all this pottery, and then you'd go to the more modern pieces with like Impressionism and Surrealism and all this stuff. And it's like, no matter what, no matter how primitive or advanced or far removed or not far removed or modern or prehistoric or whatever, people create art, whether it's jewelry, whether it's pottery, whether it's canvas work or whatever. And I sat there as an atheist, and in my brain, maybe it was the painting I was looking at or whatever, but it just made the instant leap that the same is true for religion. And no matter where you go or what society you go to, there is some form of a belief system to a connection higher than ourselves. Some people, it's, Judaism, some people it's Christianity, some people it's Islam, some people it's, Hinduism, and then there's all these other belief systems, these little guys, and even, cultures that are often disrespected in speaking about it, where it's like, oh, superstition or voodoo or something, but it's all belief in something higher, and so in my mind, it's not like I sat there and converted that day. That wouldn't have come for a long time yet, but it instilled this, it planted the seed, of the necessity for a higher belief. And so for me, I wanted to do a piece on prayer. I think that prayer is really what changes, and not like the kind of Santa Claus prayers or like ransom note prayers where it's like, if you do this for me, I'll do that. It's like it's a terrorist negotiation here. It's a prayer. Or like the Santa Claus prayers my friends and I joke about, where it's like, gimme, 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 please, I'll be good if you gimme, gimme, gimme. I want X, Y, and Z. I'm talking about like a humble prayer, which is, recognizing one's own limitations and employing the divine or the higher, whatever you want to call it, God, Brahman, whatever. There's more than two options though. Endless options. You can make your own option too. But it's like, I think that is really what evokes a lot of change is, like, I have these limitations. I need some help. And I don't know how to fix them. I'm so in it that I can't see my way out of it. My mentor taught me the Albert Einstein quote, which is, a sick mind can't heal a sick mind. So if we have a problem that centers in our minds can't very well think its way out of it, because if it could, it would have already. And so it's that open-mindedness that allows me, let's say, for instance, I don't want to put it on you, give you homework, like, you need to do this. It's not my style. I hate homework. Anyway, but it's like, help just a simple, thank you for this experience as it brings me closer to you, but help. I don't know where to go from here. And that's always a good reminder. And so I wanted to do a piece. I started with the aqua watercolor, and then I brought some white acrylic paint, like one giant stroke up. And that was really like to convey the movement of reaching up, in this state of humility and reverence and honesty and sincerity. Those quiet little moments that I think are seldom reached when we're on our phones or in a crowd. A lot of people are miserable and standing in a crowd, but it's like there's a certain sweetness and there's a real vulnerability to it when we're alone and we feel those things. And so it's just kind of conveying that moment, but it's also conveying the moment where, you hit your knees, you're alone, and you're saying, thank you so much for this opportunity, for this child, for this job, for this day. Yeah, God, I wish I was to that point where I hit my knees every morning and I'm like, this day, I'm not yet. We're going to get there, hopefully. But anyway, so then, I kind of started blanking out. I did a little bit I mixed some water with the acrylic. I kind of like using different types of paints in different ways. I mix different kinds of paints. I just want to see what it'll do, and also it just feels like the right thing to do at certain points. So for this, I think I mixed a little bit of water with acrylic to see what it would do. I don't think it did much, if I remember correctly. I made this a while ago. So then I employed some white watercolor, and I started doing these kind of strokes. You can't really see it now because there's layers. We'll get to those. But they're in there, and they're these kind of watered down little drips or, motions up. And what that is like the raining down of these little moments of inspiration, like the thoughts like, oh, maybe I'll let this person go in line in front of me. Or, you know what, oh, that older person looks like they could use a seat, I'll give mine. Or these little motions up where it's like, you're not on your knees, it's not a formal prayer, but throughout the day you just acknowledge whatever higher power you have. You just reach up and you're just like, you know what, God, you're here. And that's all that I need, or whatever, whatever you say. I don't even know if I even said that. That just came out now, but it counts now. Got one in my tally point. So anyway, as I was working on this, the idea came, all right, well, what else is needed aside from prayer? Because prayer is often this very solitary event, especially nowadays. I mean, I don't know many people who feel tremendously comfortable in a church. I take that back. I think it's probably split 50-50. There's like 50% of people who love the church. Ooh, they got their hands raised and they love it. And then there's people like myself, to be very honest, where I never really feel at ease in a church setting. I always feel like there's always like a shred of cynicism. There's always like, and I hate to admit that. But that's my truth, and that doesn't mean I don't pray. But I think that this painting speaks to the twofold need in our world for prayer and unity. Prayer is good that when you do it alone or whatever, but there's also this, I believe, requirement of a sense of community to help heal each one of us and to help heal the world as well. Because I can pray all I want alone on my knees, but if I don't interact with people in my life and take interest in them, what good is any of this? It's all them, like, we're all in our own little worlds, and ultimately, like, that, if we were supposed to do that, we wouldn't be in a world with one another. Like the fact that we're all here probably says that there's a purpose for us all being together. And so it sounds a little trite and cliche, but I think that it translates in a really beautiful way, is when I took a look at the idea of unity, obviously what came to mind was, the physical differences of different people and different groups of people across the world. Just like looking at certain geographical sections and seeing different physical similarities that are different to other areas. Maybe it's the shape of a jawline or facial features like a nose or, eyes or something like that, or the skin tone or anything like that. And so that's why I brought in a ton of different colors, is to symbolize that in a pretty straightforward but also an abstract way. Because then as I began going about it, it wasn't just the color, it was the type of brush stroke I used to symbolize other differences between us, maybe our different belief systems, our different religions, or life philosophies, or whatever you want to call it. And then I experimented with different textures as well, symbolizing our different personalities, our different sets of experiences, our different struggles, and our different victories, And the fact is that, like, we need all of those differences to create and compile this beautiful masterpiece of the world and of a unified world. And even to recognize the propensity for conflict in a unified world. I like listening to Zen speakers. Alan Watts is fantastic. He's one that I really enjoy. I was just listening to earlier this morning. And he talks about, this idea of Zen, this idea of give and take, this idea of push and pull. You hear it a lot in yogic philosophy, where it's like, the rigid meets the flexible. You have rules, but you're also to be flexible. A yoga instructor just said that in a class I went to a couple days ago. And so for me, it's about, it's not expecting the total absence of war or violence or hatred, but it's using that as a tool and a catalyst to bring the good up even higher, to amp up that volume. And so when I look at the world and, what it strikes me as needing, if I could be so presumptuous, because really, who am I to say the world needs anything? I don't know the greater picture, and I trust really and truly that everything going on is for the greatest good of all concerned. And I kind of choose to separate myself from outcomes in that way, where it's like, I don't know, I don't want to get too morbid or too detached from anything. We can talk about that later, I suppose, on a personal level. But it's like recognizing the yin and the yang, the fact that, war and violence have been a part of our makeup as humans forever. Do I think that's going to go away overnight? No, but I think that the extreme violence that is being exhibited by some will bring those of us who have been probably in the middle, I would say about myself, kind of, I don't want to say ambivalent. It's not like I'm like, smacking people with no regard, but it's like, bring us all up a little higher in the level of peacefulness. It's not just, well, I didn't, ram my car into somebody today. Basically, I'm Mother Teresa. You're welcome, society. It's also like other forms of violence, like gossip, like judgmental thinking, reveling in somebody else's misery, or being so self-centered that in a way somebody else's misery makes you feel good and kind of making their situation about you. I'm pointing to me because that's the only point of reference I know. And so anyway, I believe that prayer and unity, I think a lot of people sometimes look at art and they think that it's this trite exercise of childish creativity, if you even want to call it that, if they'll even permit that to be, a word that's used, if they'll allow that, they'll make that allowance. But it's like, when I look at this, and every time I look at this, I think of those principles. I think about prayer. I think about unity. And it conjures up those ideas in my mind. And so, in the way that I replaced body and soul on this wall, I keep motioning back there because that's where it was. When I removed body and soul and I sold it to an art collector here on Long Island, I replaced it with this, and I was like, what, maybe it is time for my daily reminder to not be that of, the external physical appearance and the internal soul. Maybe it's to take it a step further, and for that daily focus to be on the ideas of prayer and unity, which is really what I think that the world needs right now. And regardless of whether or not you think art is a necessity, I personally do. I think that it is the medicine that God has given us before the age of scientific medicine. It has healed a lot of people that I know, and a lot of people in the history books whom I look up to. I ascribe to the fact to Andy Warhol's quote where it's anything can be art. I know I mentioned that in an earlier video, but it's like, gardening is art. Running a business can be art, painting can be art, yoga can be art, dancing can be art. When I read about yoga, it's like you can do the physical poses and not be doing yoga, and in the same way I think could be said for art. You could be painting and like it not be real art, and by the same, on the flip side of that coin, you could be running a business and the way you're doing it is art. And so, this kind of is a threefold thing now that I think about it, which is what the world needs: prayer, unity, and art. But if you're not going to permit me the allowance of that last one, hopefully you at least respect the first two. And hopefully you respect this piece. But if you don't, that's cool too. It's all the yin and the yang after all. Anyway, I really enjoyed telling you the story of prayer and unity, and I hope that you've enjoyed hearing about it. If you like this, and if you don't, subscribe to my page too. Why not? Be a little masochistic, but who am I to judge? Anyway, so subscribe to my page. I put out new videos where I explain the stories behind my art. And thank you very much for watching.